Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Texas Podcast. I am your host, Gabe, and today we'll be talking about the Nueces Massacre. The Nueces Massacre, also known as the Massacre on the Nueces, was a violent confrontation between Confederate soldiers and German Texans on August 10, 1862, in Kinney County, Texas. Many first-generation immigrants from Germany settled in central Texas in a region known as the Hill Country. They tended to support the Union and were opposed to the institution of slavery. Because of these sentiments, the Confederate States of America imposed martial law in central Texas. A group of Germans fleeing from the Hill Country to Mexico and onwards after that to Union-controlled New Orleans was confronted by a company of Confederate soldiers on the banks of the Nueces River. The ensuing German defeat represented an end to overt German resistance to Confederate governance in Texas, but it also fueled outrage among the German Texan population. Disputes over the confrontation and the efficiency of the Confederate actions after the battle, according to historian Stanley McGowan, continue to plague the Hill Country into the 21st century. Germans immigrated to Texas as early as 1836. By 1860, the German population in Texas, predominantly first-generation immigrants, reached an approximate level of 20,000 across the entire state. They settled heavily in an area known as the Hill Country. The exact dimensions of Hill Country are not concrete. Germans settled so heavily in this area that the counties of Gillespie, Kerr, Kendall, Medina, and Behar comprised the German belt. During the antebellum period, Germans displayed a complex set of opinions on slavery and secession. There were several Germans who owned slaves, and some eventually supported Texas secession from the United States. Most Germans, however, were apathetic to slavery. A vocal minority of Germans was actively antagonistic to the institution of slavery. These antagonistic Germans included liberal and Republican-minded Germans known as the 48ers. Many 48ers remained loyal to the United States and several opposed slavery. Most secessionist Anglo-Texans found this to be an affront of their insurrection against the U.S. German opposition to slavery led to an animosity between the two groups throughout the 1850s. These disputes were magnified by Texas's secession from the United States in March 1861, and the start of the American Civil War on April 12, 1861. Upon the commencement of the war, Germans projected an outward appearance of passivity toward the conflict. Confederate officials, however, saw the German population as an internal threat. The most adamant supporters of the Union were Tejanos and German Texans, both from central Texas and the counties of the Texas Hill Country. They had some evidence for that suspicion. During the statewide vote in secession, German-heavy counties represented many of those along with the abolitionist northeast part of the state, to garner a majority vote against secession. Several reports in the beginning of 1862 even alleged that German communities celebrated Union victories. The state government also feared German-run local militias. The Union Loyal League, organized by several 48ers, was one such militia. The actual purpose of the League is still a debated issue. Historians Robert Shook and Stanley McGowan acknowledge, as German Texans maintained at the time, that the group's express purpose was to defend the Hill Country from Indians and outlaws. Confederates, they confirmed, considered the Union Loyal League the enforcement arm of German Unionist sentiment. Confederate officers even implicated the organization in strategies to free Union soldiers from Camp Verde. With a need for more soldiers, the Confederacy established a draft. The Germans did not want to fight against the Union and objected to being drafted. Build-up to this event began in the spring of 1862 with the initiation of a Confederate conscription for Texans, to which many German Texans voiced their objection. The Confederate Conscription Act of 1862 turned general German objection into open opposition. Because of this opposition, General Hamilton B. dispatched Captain James Duff to Gillespie County. In late May 1862, Captain Duff imposed martial law. While in Gillespie County, Captain Duff arrested and executed 2 Germans. The harsh conduct convicted several Germans to leave Texas. Frederick Tegener and his Union Loyal League associates planned a departure. Their goal was to enter Mexico and then make their way to Union-controlled New Orleans. Between August 1st and August 3rd, 1862, 61 German Texans, led by Fritz Tegener, departed from Turtle Creek headed southwest to the Mexican border. Informed of their intentions, Captain Duff dispatched Colin McRae with approximately 96 men in pursuit on August 3rd, 1862. After 6 days, Lieutenant McRae and his men spied the German Texas in a small prairie along the Nueces River on August 9th. Lieutenant McRae then formulated an attack plan to commence later in the evening. He divided his force into 2 companies to surround the camp. At approximately 1 a.m. on August 10, 1862, the Confederates closed into the camp. At first, however, even surprise and planning did not favor the Confederates. 2 Germans wandering from the camp encountered the force. The Confederates fired on these 2 Germans, which alerted the camp to the assault. Thus alerted, the Germans beat back the first Confederate charge. Several Germans, however, were disheartened by the Confederate presence and fled the field. Numbers vary, but Stanley McGowan estimates that 23 or 28 Texan Germans fled throughout the early morning hours. This reduced the German contingent by over a third. A second charge closer to dawn routed the Germans and led to the flight. Serious incapacitation or death of all German combatants. At least 5 Germans fled near the end of the battle, including Tegner. The Confederate losses out of the 96-man force counted 2 soldiers dead and 18 wounded, including Lieutenant McRae. Reports on the casualties for the vanquished Germans were sparse and inconclusive. In 1962, historian Robert Shook tallied the German casualties at 30 killed and 20 wounded. A more recent conclusion in 2003 made by historian Randolph Campbell is that 19 Germans died outright in the assault on the camp. That, however, was not the final tally for the German Texans' losses. Following the battle, Confederate soldiers killed 9 badly wounded Germans outright. Cavalrymen pursued 9 more to the Rio Grande, where they likewise killed the fleeing Germans. The total German casualty report then comes to approximately 37 killed and unknown totals of wounded among those who fled and survived. Several Germans did survive the engagement and ensuing manhunt. These combatants either hid out in Texas, fled to Mexico and California, or eventually joined Union forces in New Orleans as members of the Union 1st Texas Cavalry. More importantly, however, was how the incident affected the German community in Texas for the rest of the war. Though Confederate actions met with some ire and loud objections from other German Texans, the incident marked the general end to overt German unionism in Texas for the remainder of the war. One title for the incident, the Battle of Nueces or the Nueces Massacre, has been a contested issue since the engagement itself. Recently, historian Stanley McGowan has addressed both sides of the debate. He recognizes that the Germans were, judging by their ability to repulse a superior force, well armed. Furthermore, they were actively supporting what was at the time an enemy cause. The initial engagement, he affirms, can be called the Battle of the Nueces, but the execution of Germans following the battle, he states, lends credence to the title Nueces Massacre. No name has garnered definitive support, and McGowan admits the debate on Confederate and German actions still goes on among descendants on both sides of the incident. Upon cessation of hostilities in 1865, Germans emerged as some of the most exuberant celebrants of the Union's victory. The German language cheered the Union Monument, which also meant loyalty to the Union, in Comfort, Texas, was dedicated on August 10, 1866, to commemorate those who died at the 1862 Nueces Massacre. With the exception of those drowned in the Rio Grande, the remains of the deceased are buried at the site of the monument. It was the only monument to Unionism dedicated by locals in former Confederate territory. That is all for the Nueces Massacre. I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see y'all in the next one.